Welcome to this edition of Valor Media. This is episode number 88 for October 11th, 2021, and I'm your host, Mark Appenzeller. In last week's episode, which I had entitled Thinking Big, I talked about why it's so important to look beyond the restraints and the confines of wherever you find yourself today, specifically in the realm of a business, a nonprofit, an organization, maybe even a church. It's extremely important to have a vision beyond whatever your current mission is, because if you don't do that, it's really easy to lose steam. And as I mentioned last week, when you're not looking for the bigger goal, when you're not reaching for something that's a little bit out of reach, you will become complacent. It's human nature. We can atrophy our ambition if we don't exercise it. I think sometimes we get comfortable with a little bit of success. We convince ourselves that we've met whatever our goal was. We kind of kick back in the easy chair, and before you know it, we begin to stagnate. And the crazy thing about stagnation is it's something that unfolds slowly, but it begins quickly. Because the minute you stop moving forward, the minute you stop planning and envisioning and imagining what you can accomplish, you've already held the door open for stagnation. Stagnation grows very slowly, almost imperceptibly. Before you realize it, it has its tentacles wrapped around you. But getting its foot in the door, that happens quickly. And that's why we have to be on our guard, regardless of what our business or organization is about. Because when we stop dreaming and stop looking for what we ultimately could accomplish, we'll be satisfied with what we've done, we'll rest on our laurels, and a year from now we'll look exactly the same. But we won't be satisfied, and we won't even know why. I think when we lose that zeal for finding something different to do, we don't realize how damaging it is. We don't realize how it undermines everything that we've done before. We just recognize that one day we come to the office and suddenly the appeal that used to be there, the motivation and the inspiration and the excitement, just somehow flew out the window. And the crazy part is we didn't even realize that it did. I'm entitling today's episode Intentionally Different, because I think what we need to do is build on what we talked about last time and frame it a little bit differently. How do you maintain enthusiasm? How do you maintain your focus? How do you keep reaching for something? How do you even know what to reach for? I think a lot of that comes down to doing things in a different way. And it's not being different just for the sake of being different. Sometimes people do that and, amazingly enough, find incredible success. But I think those are kind of flukes. I think the times that someone does something just to be off the wall and actually somehow discovers that they've become tremendously successful is one of those things you can't engineer. You can't work toward. There's no guarantee that it's going to happen, and there's no guarantee that it's going to happen again. For me, if I want to succeed, I don't look at success as, I know I will have hit it big when I get to whatever. Fill in the blank. Maybe your definition is different from mine. I used to think that way. I used to think if I just had, then I'd be successful. If I was able to accomplish, then I would know I had made it. And that's a very self-defeating way to move, because you basically presume that there's only one goal in life. There's only one target that you are ever shooting for. And that's crazy. That's not real life for any of us. If it was only about accomplishing one thing, no matter how successful we became in that one thing, what in the world do we think life would look like on the other side? Maybe for you it's been a monetary kind of a pull. Maybe you've thought, wow, if I could just make $1 million. Well, if you could just make $1 million, you'd have all of the complications, all of the hassles, all of the things to figure out that come with $1 million. And for me, it was kind of a long, slow process of getting to where I am today. But I find myself now, I think, on a much more even keel, because I recognize that it's not about reaching goal number 27. It's goals 27, 28, 29, 30, and so on and so on and so on. And I keep creating new goals because I recognize that if I don't, then I don't have any mileposts in my life. And I might think that I'm making leaps and strides, but without mileposts, I'm just the guy on the Nordic track going back and forth and never leaving his basement. Now that can be difficult in a business setting because in organizations, just with the complexity of all the day-to-day stuff that we have to do to maintain our business, we can really lose focus on those lofty aspirations. Maybe if you're the owner of a business, you could be a sole proprietor, or maybe you're trying to start a new nonprofit. You may have a tremendous and valid vision for accomplishing great things, maybe for the sake of benefiting other people. It's not always about making money. But even noble goals can fall by the wayside if we don't figure out a way to really target what we're trying to do. And that's where I think the idea of being intentionally different really comes into play. You don't want to do the same thing that somebody else has done. You don't want to beat a dead horse and hope that somehow it'll be a magical new discovery. If you really want to be successful, you need to understand the benefit of being different, again, not for the sake of being different, but for the sake of serving a purpose. That can be really difficult, and for me, I really find myself being self-analytical because I look at everything that I do and I try to decide, am I just spinning my wheels? Am I going back over the same old terrain? Or am I branching out into an area that might enable me to discover personal growth, to learn things that I didn't learn before, and hopefully, in the long run, to discover some new success that I never would have gone after if I hadn't been willing to deviate from the norm. Now, for many businesses, the events of the last year and a half forced us to look long and hard at how we do things. Things that we took for granted several years ago fell by the wayside, and many of us have embraced new technologies and processes that we probably never would have had it not become a necessity. Those who were willing to be optimistic about it, to look at it as an opportunity for growth and development, have been extremely successful. I think for businesses who balked at having to take on new technological challenges, who fought it every inch of the way, kicking and screaming, they probably haven't found new success. In fact, maybe they've lost business. Maybe they found clients or customers dropping away because the business was no longer meeting the real need. It was meeting a perceived need, yesterday's need. And if the need you are trying to meet isn't current and valid and relevant for the people you're serving, then it's as cold as yesterday's soup. You may as well forget it. It might have been fantastic in its day, but its day has passed. One of the difficult things for businesses, and especially nonprofits, is to try to figure out ways to be different without being duplicative of what somebody else is doing. And a lot of times, it's also a discipline. It's kind of a self-corralling, keeping your organization in its own lane. There's an expression, particularly in the realm of the nonprofit, called mission creep. And it's where you start branching out into something that deviates so far from what your original vision and mission were that even though in the moment it might sound good, ultimately it will end up being your undoing because you're no longer true to yourself as an organization. So when you try new things, when you look beyond the obvious, you still need to make sure it aligns with the purpose that caused you to come into existence in the first place. If it doesn't, drop it like a hot potato. The business world today, especially over the last 20 years or so, has become incredibly complex. With the advent of e-commerce and the ability to order products off your phone, it really has taken things into a completely different direction. In some ways, there are more opportunities than there ever were for entrepreneurs, but in other ways, it's more competitive than ever. And there are so many people who have access to the marketplace that it can be really tough to stand out in the crowd. It's like trying to get your website to stand out in a Google search. If you're unknown and you're doing the exact same thing a million other people are, maybe you can tweak things a little bit with some search engine optimization. But ideally, there has to be something about you that really is unique. And again, not just different, but intentionally different. It's kind of like forming a niche market. It's discovering something people need that not everyone else is providing, or discovering a new angle, a new way to serve people, a creative approach that isn't being utilized by anybody else. There are different factors, a lot of them in fact, that you need to look at when you're trying to identify that kind of a market or a service opportunity. Sometimes two of the key components you need to look at are identified as being psychographics and geographics. Psychographics is all about the psychology of the people that you're trying to serve. What's important to them? What kinds of beliefs, attitudes, and values do they have? What do they esteem worthy of their time and attention? The geographics literally comes down to where are they located? Are you trying to appeal to a global market or a nationwide market? Maybe that's completely unrealistic. There may be something in your very local area, county, city, town, a need that is very specific to people from your region, something that an outsider would not understand. Maybe you can get a much deeper insight into how you can really serve people who have that need because you're from that area. You understand the complexities, the nuances, the dynamics of what it is to live there. In the 1940s in California, there was a woman named Helen Gahagan who had been an actress and who later on married the screen actor Melvyn Douglas. Now in 1944, Helen became one of the very first women elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. And she made a statement that I think is very fitting for what we're talking about here today. She talked about this idea of duplicating what somebody else is doing. Helen said, in trying to make something new, half the undertaking lies in discovering whether it can be done. When it is clear it can, duplication is inevitable. Now that's something to think about. Just finding an untapped need doesn't necessarily guarantee that you can be intentionally different in meeting it. Because if you discovered the need, somebody else probably will. So duplication will always exist to some extent. Multiple people, many people, can serve needs, the same needs, but it really comes down to having your own unique slant. Today, anybody who has ever moved has probably rented a moving truck. We take it for granted. It seems so cut and dried, but that had to start somewhere. Well, it actually started in 1919 with a guy named Ward B. Heiner. He was the founder of Red Ball Transit, and it was the very first company specifically geared toward moving people through the use of trucks. Now, that involved drivers and movers. A little bit later on, a very enterprising person named Jim Ryder got the idea that, it may be worthwhile to provide trucks that people could rent and drive themselves. So in 1933, he founded Ryder Truck Rental. But it was still an idea of renting a truck, driving it, and then driving it back to the place from where you rented it. So there was a need that needed to be met. That had an inconvenience factor to it. It wasn't always practical for people to do. In 1945, Sam and Anna Mary Carty Schoen founded U-Haul because they were meeting that outstanding need. People didn't want to have to return a rental truck to where they rented it from. If you were renting a truck in New York and moving to Los Angeles, you didn't want to drive the truck back once you got there. U-Haul solved that problem. They provided a way for people to pick up a truck in one city and leave it in another city. Now again, theoretically, Ward Heiner, Jim Ryder, and the Schoens were addressing the same need, the idea of moving goods by truck, renting trucks to do so. But they were identifying very specific requirements people had. And instead of simply duplicating what went before, they were tweaking it. They were improving on what somebody else had done. I think that's the approach that we all need to take as we strive to be intentionally different. I look at it this way: find a need and fill a need. Easier said than done, but you have to start somewhere. In your own organization, maybe there are a lot of things that you do really well, and maybe you want to branch out into new territory. Maybe you've even identified a need in your community that no one else is serving, and you want to be the very first ones to come in and fill that gap. The first critical step in the journey toward being intentionally different involves taking a very sober look at how you're doing things right now. Does your organization operate in a way that's efficient, or do you just go around in circles? Sometimes when you're in the middle of the day-to-day, that can be a tough question to answer. Valor can help. Over the years, as we've navigated various challenges as a small nonprofit, we've assembled a knowledge base, information we want to be able to share with other organizations to help them thrive and move toward whatever their goals are. If you're not quite sure where to start on your journey, contact us at info@valorxl.com, and someone from our team will get back in touch with you. We'll ask you some key questions so that we can get an understanding of where you are and where you want to be. You can learn more about the services available to you by visiting us on Facebook at ValorXL or our website www.valorxl.com. If you're a small nonprofit, you may be struggling even to find funding for what you're currently doing, let alone branching out into new territory. If that sounds like you, there's a great new resource that was put together by our executive director, Lori Riston. It's called Face Your Fears, a comprehensive grants writing course that will guide you through all the complexities of finding and writing relevant grants to fund your mission and vision. To learn more about the overall mission and vision of Valor Ministries, you can visit us on Facebook at Valor Ministries or our website www.thevalorcenter.org. And if you have suggestions for topics that you'd like us to discuss in future installments of the Valor Media podcast, please contact us at media@thevalorcenter.org. Please like and subscribe to the Valor Media podcast and join us for a new episode each Monday. And if this podcast is beneficial to you, would you benefit us by financially assisting us so that we can continue to bring episodes week after week? If so, you can make your tax-deductible donation securely online by visiting www.thevalorcenter.org and clicking on the Donate button. Or you can send a check or money order to Valor Ministries, 324 East Antietam Street, Suite 104, Hagerstown, Maryland, 21740. Thank you so much for joining me today on Valor Media. I hope you come back for next week's episode, and until then, remember this: you were made to thrive.